Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a kind of death that comes without warning. Not the roaring death of a bolter round, not the shrieking death of a missile strike tearing apart the air above a trench. Not the death that thunders toward you with 8 feet of transhuman muscle, wearing the colors of something ancient and terrible. This death is something else entirely. This death is quiet. This death is patient. This death has been watching you for weeks, maybe longer, tracking the rhythm of your life, the way you move, the small habits that reveal which side of a doorway you favor, the angle at which you tilt your head when you think you're being observed. You don't hear this death coming. One moment a man is standing at the center of a crowd, his voice rising with conviction, his followers hanging on every word that pours out of his mouth like scripture. But he has an army at his back. He has bodyguards ringing his platform in polished carapace armor. He has Vox scramblers, detection equipment, loyalty oaths sworn in blood, fortified compounds with overlapping fields of fire. He has everything an ambitious man in the 41st millennium can accumulate to keep himself alive. And then his skull comes apart from a shot fired from so far away that the sound of the rifle doesn't even reach the crowd before he's already gone. The people around him don't understand at first. They stand in confused silence, staring at what was a man a moment ago. The bodyguards spin and shout and raise their weapons and look desperately for the threat, but there is nothing to see. No muzzle flash, no follow-up shot, just the soft, damp sound of a rebellion ending before it properly began, far away. While in the shadow of a ruined chimney stack or beneath the canopy of alien undergrowth or curled inside the hollow eye socket of a forgotten colossus, something stirs. Something that was completely still for days, perhaps weeks, detaches itself from the landscape, folds its weapon with the unhurried calm of a craftsman packing away a tool, and begins the long silent walk back to the extraction point. No name, no face, no record that any of this ever happened. This is the Vindicare assassin, the most precise instrument of sanctioned murder in human history. A living weapon honed to such a fine edge that it can reach through a crowd of 10,000 people and touch exactly one of them, in exactly the right place, at exactly the right moment, and walk away as though it had never been there at all. Welcome to Q on 40K, where today we are going deep into one of the most fascinating and quietly terrifying corners of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, the Vindicare Temple of the Officio Assassinorum. We are going to explore everything: where they come from, how they are made, what they carry into the dark, and the stories of the operatives who left a mark on Imperial history with a single well-placed round. This is going to be a long one, and I want you to settle in, because the story of the Vindicare is not just the story of a soldier with a rifle. It is the story of what the Imperium of man is willing to do to protect itself, what it is willing to become, what it is willing to unmake in human beings in the name of an outcome that justifies every deed. So close your eyes for a moment if you want. Picture a world wrapped in darkness. Picture a city where a false prophet has been preaching for 3 years, his words spreading through the hab blocks like a slow fever, turning citizens into believers, believers into fanatics, fanatics into the edge of something that will cost thousands of lives if nobody acts. Picture the administratum weighing the cost. Picture the decision being made in some hushed chamber on Terra, behind locked doors and encoded Vox transmissions. Picture the order going out: one operative, one shot, one bullet to save a world. That is the Vindicare. That has always been the Vindicare. Let's start at the beginning. The Emperor's shadow hand, the Officio Assassinorum, and the dark architecture of imperial power. To understand the Vindicare, you have to understand the world that created them. And that means understanding the Officio Assassinorum, the organization that trained them, shaped them, and sends them out into the galaxy on missions that are never acknowledged, never celebrated, and never quite fully admitted to exist. The Imperium of man is, in almost every sense you can imagine, a civilization held together by force. 10,000 years of warfare, schism, rebellion, heresy, and alien predation have produced a culture that deals in absolutes. You are loyal or you are not. You serve the Emperor or you do not. There is no room for nuance in a galaxy where every border is contested, every world is a potential flashpoint, and every charismatic individual with a bad idea and a large enough audience can spark a war that will consume millions. The Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, are the Imperium's hammer. Magnificent, terrifying, and irreplaceable in a pitched battle. But a hammer is not always what you need. Sometimes the structure you're trying to repair is too delicate for a hammer. Sometimes the problem you're trying to solve is a single person standing in a crowd of 5,000 loyal citizens, and bringing the hammer down means losing all 5,000 to get at the one. Sometimes the best military mind in the galaxy, advising the wrong side, can turn a skirmish into a genocide. Sometimes a single voice, whispering the right heresies into the right ears, can corrode a planetary government from the inside until it collapses entirely. For those situations, the Imperium has the scalpel. The Officio Assassinorum, in Low Gothic, the Office of Assassins, though nobody in the 41st millennium calls it anything quite that plainly, was created during the Great Crusade in the late 30th millennium. The mastermind behind it was Malcador the Sigillite, Regent of Terra, the most trusted advisor of the Emperor of mankind, and perhaps the most cunningly intelligent human being who ever lived. Malcador understood something that the Emperor's generals and primarchs often struggled to grasp, that some wars are decided not in the field, but in the shadows, before the field is ever prepared. He gathered to himself 6 individuals, the directors primus of the original assassin clades, each representing a different philosophy of killing, each a master of a different art. They met in secret at a location known only as the Shrouds, a maze-like place deep within the Imperial Palace itself. Yet their identities were concealed even from each other, their faces hidden behind masks, their names stripped down to titles: Sire Vindicare, Sire Eversor, Sire Colexus, Sire Vanus, Cyrus Venenum, and Cyrus Calidus. And at the center of that meeting, masked like the rest of them, was Malcador himself, whom the directors knew only as the Grand Master of Assassins. They did not know their leader was the Regent of Terra. They did not know that the organization they were building had the blessing of the Emperor himself. Such was the secrecy that Malcador maintained even the Emperor's direct awareness of the program at arm's length, so that the purity of his lord's public image would never be tainted by explicit association with sanctioned murder. This is worth pausing on for a moment, and because it tells you something profound about the Imperium's relationship with its own darkest tools. The Assassinorum was not hidden from the Emperor's enemies. It was hidden from the Emperor's own court, hidden from the Primarchs, hidden from the High Lords. The existence of an organization whose entire purpose was the deliberate, targeted killing of individuals was considered so politically and philosophically dangerous that its architects operated under the assumption that knowledge of it should be distributed as thinly as possible. The right hand of the Imperium does not always tell the left hand what it is holding. From those 6 founding directors, the original clades were born. Organizations that would evolve over the following 10,000 years into the temples of the 41st millennium. And each temple specializes in a different form of elimination. The Calidus operatives are shape changers, masters of disguise and infiltration, using the drug polymorphine to literally alter their physical form and slip into the target's inner circle before striking from within. The Eversor operatives are something closer to a catastrophe in human form. Drug-flooded berserkers kept in stasis between missions because they are too dangerous to be awake, deployed to kill not just the target, but everything within reach. A weapon of terror as much as assassination. The Colexus operatives are pariah beings, souls that register as blank voids in the psychic landscape, whose very existence makes psychers and chaos-touched entities physically ill, the antithesis of everything the warp touches. The Venenum operatives deal in poisons with a subtlety that makes death look like coincidence, natural causes dressed in the clothes of fate. The Venus operatives barely kill anything at all. They are intelligence specialists, manipulators, the people who arrange for someone else to do the killing without ever knowing they were guided to it. And the Vindicare, the artists of the single, perfect, distant shot. The snipers of the Emperor. The overall command structure of the Assassinorum is deliberately opaque. The Grand Master of Assassins holds a permanent seat among the High Lords of Terror, the most powerful governing body in the Imperium, which tells you how seriously the organization is regarded at the highest levels of power. In theory, the sanction of the full Senate of the High Lords is required before an assassin can be deployed. In practice, as any honest student of Imperial history will quietly acknowledge, the full scope of what the Assassinorum actually does has never been, and probably never will be, fully known. Their own records are classified within classifications, their missions documented in ciphers that require different levels of clearance to even begin to decode. The assassins themselves are deployed alone, or at maximum in small groups from a single temple, since mixing operatives from different clades introduces unpredictability and the potential for methods that cross-contaminate each other's cover. The sole exception is the execution force, a rare, desperate, high-stakes deployment that pulls operatives from multiple temples and sends them together against a target deemed too dangerous or too well protected for any single approach. These are, well, by definition, the most extreme situations the Imperium can face. The execution force is a last resort, wrapped inside a declaration that normal tools have already failed. It is worth noting the broader context of what the Officio Assassinorum actually represents in the architecture of imperial power. Every system of government that lasts long enough eventually develops some version of this, a sanctioned mechanism for removing specific threats through targeted violence rather than mass force. The Imperium, at its trillion-person scale, in a universe that is actively hostile in ways no other setting can quite match, has simply elevated this mechanism to an art form that would be unrecognizable to any earlier civilization. The temples are not reactive institutions. They are proactive ones. They gather intelligence, they select targets, they plan operations that may not be executed for years, and they maintain an active watch on the galaxy for the next individual who represents the kind of focused, strategic threat that a regiment of guardsmen cannot adequately address. This is the world that made the Vindicare, a world where the Imperium decided, 10,000 years ago, that some people cannot be allowed to remain alive, and where the most humane way to execute that decision is to end it quickly, cleanly, and precisely, with a single shot from someone who will never be named. The first sire. The founding of the Vindicare philosophy. The name of the founding director primus of the Vindicare clade has been lost to the same deliberate process of erasure that stripped all the early operatives of their personal identities. Yet he is known in the sparse records that survive from the Great Crusade era only as Sire Vindicare, a title, not a name. But the records that do persist speak of him as the foremost sniper assassin of his age. Not merely the best shot in whatever room you placed him in, but the best shot in an era that was producing extraordinary warriors in industrial quantities, during a time when the Emperor's armies were actively remaking the galaxy, and every second generation of soldier was expected to be more capable than the last. Whatever his name was, whatever the circumstances were that brought him to Malcador's notice, Sire Vindicare was the individual who distilled a philosophy of killing into a set of principles so clear and so enduring that they have governed the temple bearing his name for 10,000 years since. Those principles begin with a Latin phrase that has survived in the temple's records as both motto and dictum: exitus, acta probat. The outcome justifies the deed. Sit with that for a moment, because it is doing a great deal of philosophical work in very few words. The outcome justifies the deed, not the method, not the suffering involved, not the moral weight of what is being done or to whom. The outcome. If the result, the specific person being removed from the galaxy, is the correct result, then every act performed in service of achieving it is vindicated by achieving it. The Vindicare does not agonize over whether the target deserves to die. That question has already been answered by the High Lords of Terror or the Grand Master of Assassins, far away in sealed chambers where those decisions are made. And the Vindicare's only obligation is to the execution, not even to the execution in a particular way, only to the fact of it. This is, in the philosophical vocabulary that the wider Imperium uses, an extremely pragmatic position. And it is, for what it is worth, a position that the Vindicare Temple has maintained without deviation or apparent internal conflict for 10,000 years, which tells you something about the kind of person the temple selects and the kind of conditioning it applies. The name Vindicare itself comes from an old Terran language, Latin, the tongue of an ancient civilization that once occupied a relatively small peninsula on old Earth and somehow imposed its grammar on an entire planet. In its original form, the verb vindico carries several interlocking meanings that all speak to the temple's identity: to avenge, to vindicate, to punish, to liberate, to defend. All of these things at once. The Vindicare does not merely kill. The Vindicare avenges. Every shot fired is framed within the temple's internal culture as a form of justice. The target is someone who has wronged the Imperium, a traitor who broke oaths, a heretic who spread corruption, a Xenos threat whose survival represents an active harm to humanity. The bullet is not murder. The bullet is verdict and sentence delivered simultaneously. This framing matters more than it might seem, because it is part of what sustains an operative across the extraordinary demands of the missions they undertake. You will understand this better once we discuss what those missions actually require of the human body and mind. For now, understand that the Vindicare is trained not just as a shooter, but as someone who has been given a deeply specific reason to believe that what they do is right. That righteousness is a tool as surely as the rifle is a tool, perhaps more important than the rifle in the end. The founding clade established its traditions during the Great Crusade, a period when the Imperium was expanding at incredible speed, conquering world after world and incorporating the surviving populations into the growing structure of human civilization. In this environment, the nascent Vindicare clade found no shortage of work. Enemy commanders who were too well defended for conventional assault, political figures in newly conquered territories who were consolidating resistance, false leaders emerging from populations traumatized by conquest, but offering their people a different story about the future, one that did not include serving the emperor. These were the early targets. These were the kills that proved the clade's worth and established the template for everything that followed. For decades during the Great Crusade, the clade operated in almost complete secrecy, its existence known to only a handful of individuals at the very apex of imperial power. This secrecy was not merely a tactical advantage, it was part of the philosophy. The Vindicare does not need to be feared in advance, the way that a Space Marine chapter might be feared. The Vindicare does not announce itself. The Vindicare simply acts. And in the silence after the action, the lesson is delivered to all those who knew the target. There is no safe place in the galaxy to defy the Imperium. That there is no personal army large enough, no fortification strong enough, no security protocol thorough enough to guarantee that tomorrow morning you will still be alive to give orders. The fear is not in the knowing that the Vindicare exists. The fear is in not knowing whether you are already being watched. Becoming nothing, recruitment, selection, and the unmade self. Let us talk about where Vindicare assassins come from. Because the process that produces one is, in its own quiet way, as extreme a form of human transformation as the surgeries that produce a Space Marine. More extreme in some respects, because what the Vindicare Temple does to its operatives is not entirely a physical transformation. It reaches into the personality itself, into the self, and deliberately removes the parts that the temple has decided are incompatible with the work. Most of those who enter the training pipeline of the Officio Assassinorum are taken from one of two sources. The first is the Schola Progenium, the great imperial schools that take in orphaned children of imperial servants who died in service, raising them in the doctrines of the imperial creed and training them for roles in the ecclesiarchy, the Adepta Sororitas, the Militarum Tempestus, or other elite organizations of the Imperium. The Schola Progenium is, in essence, a conveyor belt of highly conditioned, institutionally loyal, thoroughly educated children who have no family ties and no personal history to interfere with their absorption into the service of the Emperor. The second source is less formal: feral worlds, hive worlds, and other environments that produce individuals with specific talents in unusual abundance. Someone who grew up surviving on an untamed world where hunting was a daily necessity might arrive at adulthood with an instinctive grasp of concealment, patience, and long-range engagement that no amount of formal training could have instilled in a city-bred adolescent. These individuals are found through the Assassinorum's network of scouts and informants scattered across the galaxy, quiet people in quiet positions who report upward when they encounter a mind or a body that matches the profile. In both cases, what the recruiters are looking for shares several defining characteristics: a peerless natural aptitude for accuracy, not just the ability to hit a target, but the deeper neurological architecture that underlies consistent precision, the spatial reasoning, the stillness of mind, the physical control that allows a person to hold perfectly motionless for extended periods while remaining mentally sharp. Alongside this, a strength of will that borders on stubbornness, an ability to endure isolation without psychological deterioration, and a demonstrated willingness to kill, not violence for its own sake, which is the profile you're looking for if you're building an Eversaw, but something more specific: the capacity to identify a target, make a decision, and follow through without hesitation. Once identified, the candidates are gathered and put aboard specialized Assassinorum transport ships for the journey to Terra. And this journey is not a rest period. Even before reaching the temples, the candidates begin their first test. They are pitted against hazardous environments constructed within the ship's training decks, against each other, against psychological challenges designed to reveal weakness, instability, or the kind of attachment to personal survival that would make an operative unreliable in the field. The attrition rate on these voyages is staggering. Approximately only 1 in 10 candidates survives the journey in a state that the Temple Masters consider suitable for further training. Think about that number. 9 of every 10 children or young adults who are selected from the finest raw material across thousands of worlds are considered insufficient by the end of a single voyage. The 10 who survive are not the lucky ones. They are the ones who were already, in some fundamental way, built differently. On Terra, and the surviving candidates are sorted, their individual aptitudes, psychological profiles, physiological assessments, and performance records from the voyage are reviewed by the Temple Masters of each clade. This is not a simple process. It involves a level of analysis that would have been considered impossible in any earlier era, incorporating neurological mapping, genetic assessment, and psychological profiling of a depth that modern medicine would struggle to comprehend. Each candidate is matched to the temple that can best use what they are, and the training begins. For the Vindicare candidates, the next phase lasts approximately 10 years. 10 years. A full decade. Inside a hidden temple, somewhere on Terra, a location so classified that its coordinates are unknown to anyone outside a small circle of the most senior Assassinorum leadership. For those 10 years, a Vindicare candidate ceases to exist as a social being. They are not a person in any sense that the outside world would recognize. They have no name in common use. They have no family. They have no possessions except what the temple issues them. They have no future except the missions they will eventually be assigned. They have, in many ways, no past. The temple works deliberately to sever the psychological connections to whatever life they lived before arrival, not through cruelty, but through the simple replacement of all meaning with a single new meaning, the perfect shot. The training itself is extraordinary in its scope and its demands. The obvious component is marksmanship, daily, exhaustive, relentless marksmanship drills that push the candidate's natural abilities far beyond what unaided human genetics can achieve. Hours of dry firing exercises that train the trigger hand to exert exactly the same pressure, on exactly the same point, at exactly the same rate, every single time. Long sessions lying completely still in various simulated environments: urban rubble, forest undergrowth, volcanic rock, flooded lowlands, teaching the body to find the position that allows maximum stability while minimizing the visible profile. Shooting at distances that begin at several hundred meters and extend, over the years, to ranges where the curvature of a planet's surface and the rotation of its body become factors that must be consciously accounted for. But marksmanship is only one component of what a Vindicare needs to be. A sniper who cannot reach the firing position without being detected is useless. A sniper who cannot hold the position for the time required without being compromised is useless. A sniper who panics or hesitates when the shot presents itself after days or weeks of waiting is useless. So the training expands to encompass stealth, not the theatrical stealth of someone hiding behind a wall, but the deep, physical, almost meditative stillness of a person who has learned to become genuinely imperceptible. Movement becomes architecture. Every decision about how to cross a space is made in 3 dimensions simultaneously, accounting for sightlines, acoustics, thermal signatures, and the psychological rhythms of the guards and security systems being evaded. There is a particularly striking piece of conditioning that the Vindicare temple applies to its operatives, and it speaks to the depth of the transformation being attempted. Vindicare assassins are trained to deliberately limit their vocabulary. Only words that have operational utility, words related to targeting, positioning, weapons, environmental conditions, distances, and mission parameters, are reinforced and cultivated. The vast vocabulary of ordinary social interaction, the words that carry the weight of relationship and personality and casual human connection, are systematically allowed to atrophy. Not because the temple wants its operatives to be incapable of complex thought. Vindicare operatives are, by any measure, extraordinarily intelligent individuals, but because the words you use shape the thoughts you are capable of having, and the temple is specifically trying to prevent its operatives from forming the kinds of thoughts that lead to hesitation. If you do not have a word for attachment, it becomes harder to feel attachment. If you do not have a word for doubt, the thought that leads to hesitation before the shot becomes harder to articulate even to yourself. This is not a minor adjustment. This is the deliberate reconstruction of a person's inner life at the level of language. And it is done to people who arrived as children, before their personalities were fully formed, which makes the process both more effective and more complete. A Vindicare who emerged from 10 years of this conditioning does not secretly harbor the warm social instincts that were present when they arrived. Those instincts have been replaced by something else. A quality of attention, a stillness of purpose, a total orientation toward the single moment of the shot that the temple regards as the essential character of what a Vindicare is. Emotional attachments to other humans are not merely discouraged. They are considered a liability of the highest order. The temple's reasoning is cold and precise. A Vindicare who is capable of caring about the people around them will, eventually, be in a situation where the needs of the mission conflict with the needs of a person they care about. And in that moment, they will hesitate, or fail, or make a choice that compromises the outcome, which the Vindicare's entire existence is dedicated to protecting. Better, the temple decided 10,000 years ago, to remove the possibility of that conflict entirely. A Vindicare who feels nothing for anyone will never be undone by feeling too much. By the time the training is complete, what emerges is not quite a weapon and not quite a person. It is something in between. a human being who has retained all the flexibility, creativity, and adaptability that makes a human being more effective in complex environments than any machine, but who has surrendered everything about themselves that would make them legible as a social creature. They do not seek companionship. They do not build friendships. They do not maintain relationships with their handlers beyond the functional exchange of mission information. They are given orders, and they carry them out. They are given a target, and they find a way to end that target's existence. And then they return, silently, to the temple, where the cycle begins again. Interestingly, adult candidates are occasionally taken and put through the same process. Individuals identified by Inquisitor connections or the Assassinorum's own scouts as possessing the rare combination of talents that the temple needs. These adults undergo the same treatment as the children, receiving the biological implants and the hypno-conditioning that burns away the old identity. The process is harder on adults because there is more self to dismantle, but the Assassinorum has been doing this long enough to have refined the methods to near-perfect reliability. The body of a ghost, augmentations, physical conditioning, and the Vindicare physiology, the biological modifications applied to Vindicare assassins, are considerably subtler than those applied to their more overtly extreme counterparts in the Officio Assassinorum. An Eversaur is a walking biochemical catastrophe. 2 hearts, stimulant reservoirs implanted directly into the bloodstream, combat drugs that can push the body into states of speed and strength that tear muscle fibers faster than they can repair. A Calexis is a pariah, a human whose soul registers as an absence in the Imperium, whose very existence is an offense to the warp. A Vindicare, by contrast, looks almost like a normal human being. Almost. The augmentations are real and they are significant, but they are designed to enhance rather than transform. The neurological architecture of a Vindicare's hand, eye, and trigger finger is modified at a level that makes the kind of consistency of performance required by the temple's standards reliably achievable day after day across a career spanning decades. Microtremors in the muscles of the hand are addressed through a combination of selective neural dampening and enhanced proprioceptive feedback that gives the operative a level of control over their own musculature that no unaugmented human can approach. The eye is modified for long-range clarity and environmental adaptability, allowing the operative to maintain useful targeting vision in conditions: low light, dust, smoke, unfamiliar atmospheric spectra that would render a normal human effectively blind. The respiratory system is modified to support the technique that any serious sniper understands: the brief natural pause between exhale and inhale. The moment when the body is at its most still is the ideal window for the shot. A Vindicare's modified respiratory system allows them to extend this window deliberately and comfortably, holding in that moment of stillness for far longer than any unaugmented human could manage without physical distress. Their heart rate, too, falls under conscious control to a degree that blurs the line between physiology and meditation. A resting heart rate that can be brought low enough during the preparation for a shot that it barely registers against even sensitive medical monitoring equipment. The musculature is enhanced without being visibly augmented. The Vindicare's body is in the physical condition of an elite athlete, but the kind of lean, dense, sustainable fitness that comes from decades of maintenance rather than the sudden transformation of a Space Marine's genocide. They carry no extra mass, because extra mass means more heat signature, more noise, more difficulty holding positions for extended durations. A Vindicare is built for the long wait as much as the brief action. One of the more unusual elements of the Vindicare's augmentation is what happens to their sleep cycle. As their training progresses and their conditioning deepens, the need for sleep diminishes, and in older, more experienced operatives, it is said to disappear almost entirely. The ability to hold a position for days or weeks without sleeping, or without the body's natural demands for rest, disrupting the long vigil, is an extraordinary operational advantage. It also speaks to something about the transformation the temple has imposed on these individuals. They are being gradually optimized away from the rhythms of ordinary human biology. An old Vindicare who cannot sleep is not tragic in the way that inability would be for someone who still had a life they wanted to rest from. They have been made into something that simply requires less. The immune system receives significant enhancement as well, protecting the operative from the extraordinary range of environmental hazards they may encounter in the field: toxins, airborne pathogens, extreme temperature conditions, and the wide variety of biological weapons that the galaxy's various factions deploy. Now, paired with the stealth suit's protective properties, a Vindicare can endure in environments that would kill an unprotected human within hours and maintain operational effectiveness throughout. Taken together, these augmentations produce a human being who is not superhuman in any single obvious dimension. They do not have the raw physical power of an Astartes. They do not have the warp-touched special abilities of a Calexis. They do not have the biochemical acceleration of an Eversaw. What they have is a total integration of every human capability that contributes to the single act of firing one shot perfectly, combined with an extraordinary resilience that allows them to reach the firing position and hold it long after anyone else would have given up. It is also worth noting that Vindicare operatives are among the most fully autonomous agents in the entire Imperium. Once deployed, they operate without support, without communications that could be intercepted, without the kind of logistical infrastructure that a conventional military unit requires. They must be capable of navigating across a galaxy by any means available: convincing, bribing, stowing away, flying, sailing, or walking, as the situation demands. They must understand the history and internal structure of the Imperium well enough to move through it without arousing suspicion. They must speak the relevant languages, understand the relevant social hierarchies, and be able to convince people who are deeply suspicious of strangers that they are harmless. And then, having done all of that and reached the firing position and taken the shot, they must reverse the entire process and extract themselves from territory that is now actively hostile. The individual skill and self-reliance required for all of this is, by any standard, remarkable. The tools of the quiet death: the Exitus weapons, the spy mask, and the stealth suit. There is no piece of military hardware in the Imperium of Man that is built to the standard of the Vindicare assassin's primary weapon. The Adeptus Mechanicus produces extraordinary things: the plasma guns that are the pride of the Imperial Guard, the lascannons that have split open vehicles for 10,000 years, the power weapons that hum with barely contained energy and can shear through ceramite like cloth. But none of those weapons are built the way the Exitus rifle is built. Every single Exitus rifle is handcrafted by a Magos artisan of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Not a production line, not a workshop of skilled artificers working from a common template, but a single master-level tech priest who spends an extended period of time building one rifle for one specific individual to that individual's precise physical specifications. The rifle is balanced to the shooter's dominant hand, calibrated to the particular characteristics of their enhanced musculature, weighted in a way that accounts for the specific manner in which that operative steadies their aim. The scope assemblies are matched to the visual augmentations of the individual's eyes. The trigger mechanism is adjusted to the particular pressure and travel distance that this specific shooter uses to deliver the perfect shot. Each Exitus rifle is paired with a matching Exitus pistol, produced by the same process for the same individual. The two weapons are, together, a matched set that could be identified as belonging to a specific operative, even without any formal marking, simply by examining how they are made. And these weapons are gene-coded to their user, encoded at the molecular level with the biological signature of the person they were built for, which means that if someone else picks one up, the weapon will not function. More than not functioning, in some reports, handling someone else's Exitus weapon without the appropriate coding produces actively unpleasant effects for the unauthorized user. This level of personalization is not vanity. It is an engineering decision made in recognition of what is being asked of the equipment. The Exitus rifle fires rounds that travel multi-kilometer distances and are expected to hit a specific point on a target's anatomy Not just the body, but the precise location on the body that the operative has identified as optimal for the outcome required. A shot that hits the wrong place by a few centimeters can mean the difference between an immediate, silent death and a wounded target who survives long enough to raise an alarm. The tolerance for error is essentially zero, and achieving that standard of performance across the environmental variability of real missions — wind, humidity, temperature gradients, irregular atmospheric pressure, the rotation of the planet, gravitational anomalies — requires a weapon that is as precisely matched to its user as the user is precisely matched to the work. The standard ammunition that an Exitus rifle fires is constructed from what the Mechanicus calls heavy gravity alloys, materials that do not occur naturally at normal pressures and temperatures, synthesized specifically to produce kinetic projectiles with the combination of density, velocity, and impact characteristics required to punch through ceramic armor and battleplate from extreme distances. These are the general-purpose rounds, used for most shots, the kind of target that requires no special approach, just precision placement at a range that would challenge most other weapons in the Imperium to even reach. But the Exitus rifle's real distinction is its ability to fire specialized ammunition types, each engineered for a specific category of problem. The shield breaker round is perhaps the most technically remarkable piece of ammunition in the Imperium's arsenal, and the fact that even the tech priests who manufacture it do not fully understand how it works should tell you something about how old and how strange the underlying technology is. Each shield breaker round is treated with a psychically charged imprint, a process that involves exposing the round during manufacture to a carefully controlled psychic influence that leaves a kind of energetic signature on the projectile. The round also contains a complex circuit of antiphase technology that, when the round reaches the target's personal energy shielding, causes the shield to catastrophically overload rather than deflect the incoming projectile. Well, what this means in practical terms is that there is no personal force field of any known type that a shield breaker round cannot disable. Conversion fields, which convert the kinetic energy of incoming fire into diffuse light. Refractor fields, which scatter incoming rounds. The rune-woven armor of an Eldari warlock, whose psychic protection is woven directly into the fabric of the suit itself. The warp field projections that some tyrannid organisms generate naturally, all of them fall to the shield breaker. The assassin does not need to find a gap in the protection. They simply remove the protection and then, if necessary, follow up. The Hellfire round is a biological weapon in the form of a bullet. But the core and tip of the standard Exitus round are replaced with a vial of virulent mutagenic bioacid, a compound designed specifically to have catastrophic effects on organic matter. Upon impact, thousands of armor-piercing microneedles deliver this acid directly into the target's body, where it begins working on flesh and metal alike with horrific speed. Hellfire rounds are particularly effective against the hyper-aggressive biology of tyrannid organisms, whose bodies are normally resistant to many conventional weapons. They are also used in situations where the assignment requires not just the target's death, but a specific manner of death, one that leaves the body in a condition that tells a message, or that implicates a particular cause of death in the forensic examination that follows. Yet the Turbo Penetrator round is designed for targets that exist behind layers of physical protection that even the heavy gravity standard rounds might struggle against. It is, in its lore description, a hypervelocity adamantine jacketed shell surrounding a magno-sealed flux needle. The outer jacket delivers the first impact, and the contained secondary round is launched through the resulting breach by a two-stage charge, penetrating with a diamond-hard tip through whatever protection remains.
Okay, real talk for a second because I genuinely love this part of the lore, and I want to say so before we keep going. Out of every faction, every unit, every corner of this setting, the Vindicare is the one I come back to when someone asks me what Warhammer 40K is actually about. Because the Space Marines are cool, and the tanks are cool, and the demons are terrifying. But the Vindicare is the part where the setting looks you in the eye and says, here's what it costs. Not in blood and fire, in a person, in the deliberate, careful, considered destruction of everything that made one specific human being a human being, repurposed into the cleanest possible instrument of Imperial will. And I find that genuinely haunting in a way that nothing else in this hobby does for me quite as completely. I don't know if that is the intended reaction, but I think it might be. But either way, that was just my 2 cents. Let's go back to the video.
These rounds can punch through the thickest ceramite armor, through vehicle hulls, and through barriers that have no business being vulnerable to a rifle round by any conventional calculation. Thus, the secondary effects of the round's passage through matter, operating at velocities and energies that have molecular-level disruption effects on whatever they pass through, make a hit from a turbo-penetrator round something that even beings with extraordinary resilience cannot simply shrug off. There is also the immolator round, which contains a cellular disintegrator that causes any organic matter it strikes to undergo a reaction so extreme that literally nothing of the target remains. This round is not primarily used to kill. It is used to make a statement, or to prevent forensic examination, or to deny an enemy the use of a martyr's body. In certain situations, an operative needs the target to simply not exist anymore, without evidence of what happened, and the immolator round provides exactly that. Whilst one of the most fascinating technical details about all Exitus ammunition, including these specialized rounds, is that they contain miniaturized cogitator targeting spirits. Tiny sophisticated machine intelligences built into each round that function, in practice, as guidance systems. A bullet that contains its own logic for course correction at the molecular level is, to put it plainly, not a bullet that any normal body armor or evasive action can reliably defeat. Once fired, the round has been described as essentially impossible to avoid. This is not hyperbole in the 40K universe. It is an engineering characteristic that the Assassinorum considers essential to the standard of performance their operatives must meet. Alongside the weapons, the Vindicare carries 2 additional pieces of technology that are equally important to their operational effectiveness. The spy mask is a full face covering that attaches to the wearer via surgically bonded magnaclamps. It does not simply rest on the face, it integrates with the operative's own biology through neural jacks that directly interface with the cerebellum. Through these jacks, the mask's sensor suite uploads data directly into the assassin's mind, not displayed on a screen, not shown through a lens, but fed as direct sensory input into the brain itself. Trajectories, atmospheric conditions of every type and degree, thermal imaging that can identify a target's body heat through walls and at distances far beyond what any optical scope could manage. Psychic disturbance readings that can detect the telltale energetic signatures of warp-touched individuals, even when those individuals are concealed or disguised. Enemy communication channels, monitored and decoded in real time, and fed into the assassin's consciousness as background awareness rather than active reading. The mask also carries concentrated food and water cartridges, capable of sustaining an operative for the multi-week vigils that are simply part of the job. The stealth suit is a matte black body glove that appears deceptively simple, but represents one of the most advanced material science achievements in the Imperium. The Vindicare Temple maintains a long-standing formal pact with the Adeptus Mechanicus, specifically for the manufacture of these suits. Another indication of how seriously the Mechanicus regards the Assassinorum as a partner worth maintaining relationships with. Each suit is produced for a specific individual and combines 2 technologies in an integrated system. The first is a complex version of synskin, the substance that, when applied or bonded to a body, creates a second skin that enhances reflexes, protects against environmental toxins, absorbs some of the shock of impacts, and provides a degree of thermal insulation that prevents the wearer from showing a significant heat signature on most sensors. The second is camelioline, a material that contains photoreactive compounds which respond to the ambient light and color of the environment around the wearer, adjusting the suit's surface characteristics to blend with the surroundings. When the operative is moving, the camouflage is imperfect. The eye can detect the slight shimmer of a form moving through space if it knows what to look for. But when the operative is still, as they will be for the majority of the vigil, the camelioline renders them very nearly invisible against the background. Very nearly is doing substantial work in that sentence. In practice, Vindicare assassins have occupied positions in plain sight, In the middle of busy streets, on rooftops overlooking parade grounds, and in galleries above great halls, and remained undetected for extended periods by eyes that were specifically looking for threats. The combination of the camellia-lined suit, the thermal masking of the sin-skin layer, and the operative's own trained discipline of absolute stillness produces a figure that does not register against any natural or most technological detection methods. Together, the rifle, the matched pistol, the spy mask, and the stealth suit form what might be the most sophisticated personal assassination kit in the galaxy. The Aeldari, often cited as possessing the most elegant technology in the known universe, crafted from wraithbone and living crystal, and things that have no analogue in Imperial understanding, acknowledge, in the records of various engagements, that they have lost valued individuals to Vindicare assassins who they never detected. That is a remarkable statement. It is perhaps the highest professional compliment the Vindicare can receive. Exitus Acta Probat, the art and philosophy of the single shot. Now that we understand what a Vindicare is and what they carry, let us talk about how they actually work. Not the mechanics of the shot itself, but the whole architecture of a Vindicare operation from the moment the order is issued to the moment the operative is extracted. The target must be selected first, and this process is not the Vindicare's responsibility. The High Lords of Terror, or in practice the Grand Master of Assassins operating with appropriate authorization, have already made that determination before any individual operative is briefed. What reaches the operative is a kill order, a document, encoded in layers of cipher, that identifies the target, summarizes the intelligence that justifies the elimination, and provides whatever contextual information the Assassinorum has gathered about the target's location, movement patterns, and protection arrangements. The operative reads this order and then, to all practical purposes, begins to become invisible. Every mission begins with a period of intensive intelligence gathering that the Vindicare conducts personally. The existing Assassinorum files on the target are a starting point, but they are never sufficient. A target who has been assessed as worth an assassination sanction is almost by definition someone who has cultivated security, who has surrounded themselves with protection, physical, political, informational. Getting a clear shot at this person requires understanding them with a degree of intimacy that the pre-existing files cannot provide. So the operative arrives in the target's environment and simply watches, for days, sometimes weeks. They observe the rhythms of daily life around the target, when the target moves, by which routes, with how many guards, at what times, in what vehicles, with what habits and what deviations from habit. They map the physical environment in 3 dimensions, identifying every potential firing position within effective range, assessing each position for sightlines, approach routes, detection risk, proximity to escape routes, and the quality of the shot angle it would offer. They eliminate positions one by one through a process of gradual deduction until they arrive at the best available option, not necessarily the safest position to reach, and not necessarily the easiest shot to make, but the position that gives the optimal combination of all relevant factors. The firing position becomes the operative's world for the duration of the vigil. In the most extreme documented cases, this vigil lasts years, not days, not weeks, years. The operative makes themselves comfortable in an extremely uncomfortable situation and simply waits, eating from the suit's concentrated rations, drinking from its water supply, remaining still enough that the camellia line blends them into the environment, monitoring the target through the spy mask's thermal and electromagnetic sensors, and sleeping in brief controlled cycles if they have not yet reached the stage of augmentation where sleep is no longer required. This level of patience is so alien to most human experience that it is genuinely difficult to explain what sustains it. The conditioning plays its role. A Vindicare does not experience the absence of stimulation, company, and comfort as the kind of grinding psychological torment that it would represent for an unmodified person. The waiting is simply the work. But beyond the conditioning, there is something else at play: the intense, focused quality of attention that the temple has cultivated in its operatives. A Vindicare who is waiting for their shot is not waiting passively. They are thinking, constantly, carefully, but with extraordinary precision, about everything that could affect the shot when it finally presents itself. The wind patterns over the next 6 hours. The guard rotations impact on the optimal window of opportunity, the way the light changes at different times of day, and how that will affect the shot angle they have chosen. The backup plan, if the primary position is compromised. The route to the extraction point, and the contingencies for every possible scenario on that route. The mind of a Vindicare at vigil is not empty. It is very quietly, very precisely full. And then the moment comes. The target steps into the window of opportunity. The precise alignment of position, visibility, environmental conditions, and circumstances that the operative has been waiting to see. Maybe the target pauses at a predictable moment during a speech. Maybe they step briefly outside their vehicle to inspect a position. Maybe they appear in a window at the same time every morning because they have a habit of watching the sunrise, and they have lived long enough in apparent safety to let their guard down about that habit. The spy mask feeds the operative a stream of targeting data, distance, atmospheric pressure, local gravity variations, wind speed, and direction at multiple altitudes between the firing position and the target. The cogitator spirits in the chosen round are already spinning up, ready to make microscopic corrections in flight. The operative's modified respiratory cycle reaches its still point. The heart rate drops. The hand steadies. One shot. The target is down before the sound arrives. The operative is already moving, calmly, us back through the route they mapped during the reconnaissance phase. At some point during the vigil, they have placed small additional gifts for anyone who comes looking. Fragmentation grenades on pressure triggers, monofilament wire at neck height in corridors, chemical agents that will incapacitate investigators without killing them, because killing the investigators draws the wrong kind of attention. The traps are not meant to hurt everyone who follows the operative out of the position. They are meant to slow pursuit long enough that there is no pursuit worth worrying about by the time they are deployed. The extraction uses whatever cover the operative arranged before the operation. A false identity, a booked passage on an outgoing transport, a stashed personal spacecraft, a pre-arranged pickup by an assassinorum rapid response vessel. The operative departs the scene without leaving forensic evidence of who they are or where they came from. What they leave behind is a dead target, a confused investigation that will never fully establish the facts, and the quiet message that the Imperium delivers through every operation like this. There is no safety in defiance. The philosophical stance of the Vindicare toward their targets is worth considering. The temple trains its operatives to think of every target through the lens of the mission outcome rather than the personal characteristics of the individual being eliminated. This is partly the conditioning, the reduced vocabulary, the severed emotional connections, the total orientation toward outcome over process, but it is also a matter of practical necessity. A Vindicare. Assassin will, over a career, eliminate people with very different moral profiles. A planetary governor who has sold his world to chaos, certainly. A military commander who has committed atrocities in defiance of imperial law, absolutely. But also, occasionally, people who seem from the outside considerably more sympathetic. A charismatic political figure whose ideas the High Lords find threatening. A scientist whose discoveries have been deemed heretical. A religious leader who has decided that a different interpretation of imperial faith is worth dying for. The Vindicare does not question these orders. The motto is exitus acta probat. The outcome justifies the deed. And the implicit assumption is that the outcome, the Imperium's continued existence, yet the preservation of the order that keeps 10 trillion human lives alive in a universe that wants them dead, is always sufficient justification for the deed, regardless of the individual circumstances. This is not a comfortable philosophy for anyone who thinks carefully about it. But the Vindicare is not trained to be comfortable. They are trained to be precise. Legends. written in one bullet, the documented stories of Vindicare excellence. For an organization whose existence is so carefully concealed that most of the Imperium's citizens believe Imperial assassins to be myths, the Vindicare Temple has accumulated a remarkable archive of documented extraordinary operations. Most of these records are buried behind layers of classification that would take a senior inquisitor months to penetrate. But certain stories have leaked into the wider Imperial consciousness, either because they were too dramatic to be fully suppressed, or because the assassinorum itself allowed them to circulate as a form of deterrence. Let us walk through the ones we know about and take a moment to really sit with what they represent. The engagement, known in the classified record as Operation Statuesque, which occurred in the 243rd year of the 39th Millennium, is perhaps the most famous single demonstration of the Vindicare's defining quality, patience as a weapon. A Dark Eldar pilot known as Skyclife had become, over several decades of raiding activity, a genuine strategic problem for the worlds in the sectors they preyed upon. Dark Eldar raids from Komorrah, the great hidden city existing within the webway, as the extra-dimensional network of tunnels through space that the ancient Eldari once maintained, are among the most horrifying experiences any Imperial world can endure. The raiders appear without warning, strike with overwhelming precision and terrifying speed, take what they want, which is usually people alive, for purposes best not dwelt upon in a calm narration, and vanish back into the webway before any organized response can engage them. The Skyclife was particularly skilled at this, a pilot whose mastery of the Dark Eldar Razorwing jet fighter was exceptional even by the standards of a race that has been flying these aircraft for millennia, and whose raids had accumulated a casualty count that the Officio Assassinorum eventually decided was sufficient to justify a kill sanction. The obvious approach, sending an operative into Komorrah itself, was evaluated and dismissed. Komorrah is a city of nightmares where even the most skilled human operative would face near-certain death before achieving anything. The architecture of the place shifts. The population is universally hostile to any human presence. The laws of physics operate differently within it. No amount of training or equipment makes a lone human operative a viable agent inside Komorrah. So the Vindicare assassin Dejedris Garamach did not go to Komorrah. Instead, he went to Threndian, a world where previous intelligence had recorded a sighting of the Skyclife's aircraft. He located the Threndian Colossus, an ancient statue of extraordinary scale, and climbed into the hollow chamber of one of its eye sockets. And he waited. Or from within that eye socket, subsisting on what his suit could provide, and on the sparse resources of the environment, moss growing in the damp stone crevices, the raw flesh of the birds that roosted in the statue's ancient cracks. Dejedris Garamach waited. He watched the sky through his spy mask sensors, monitoring for the specific electromagnetic signature of the Razorwing's drives, the thermal profile of the craft, the movement patterns that would tell him the Skyknife was approaching. He waited for 6 years. 6 years, inside a stone statue, eating birds, watching the sky. And then, in the 249th year of the 39th Millennium, the Skyclife's Razorwing appeared from the webway transit point in a flash of azure light, exactly as previous records suggested it would, at exactly the location the previous records specified. The aircraft was in mid-air, moving at combat speed, the pilot inside protected by the best personal shielding that Dark Eldar technology could provide. Within half a second of the aircraft's appearance in real space, Dejedris Garamach put a turbo-penetrator round through the cockpit. The Skyknife died instantly. The aircraft came down. The mission was complete. 6 years of vigil, rewarded with one shot, half a second long. The story of Moria Skult and the elimination of the greenskin warboss known as Urgak the Unstoppable is equally remarkable, though in a very different register. In the 924th year of the 40th Millennium, the early years of what we would call the modern era, the Orc tribes of the Roxanzan system had begun uniting under this single leader. For greenskin culture, The emergence of a dominant war boss who can hold multiple tribes in a coherent alliance is a warning sign of the First Order. The beginning of the process by which a scattered raiding tendency becomes an organized military force capable of overwhelming entire planetary systems. The war boss was, by all accounts, genuinely extraordinary within the context of his kind, enormous, charismatic in the particular brutal way that greenskin culture rewards. And presiding over the construction of a Gargant, one of the titanic war machines that represent the apex of greenskin engineering ambition, a vehicle so massive and so destructive that its completion would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the region. Imperial resources in the sector were stretched. A full military deployment was not feasible before the Gargant's construction was completed. The Senatorum Imperialis authorized a Vindicare deployment. Morias Skuld arrived in the system via an Assassinorum rapid response vessel and deployed to the planet's surface in a one-man drop pod. A pod small enough and moving fast enough that the green skin detection capabilities in the area did not identify it as a significant intrusion. He made his way through territory saturated with green skin presence, using skills and training that turned a landscape crawling with hostile combatants into an obstacle course rather than a barrier. He infiltrated the camp itself. 5 greenskin sentries died during this approach. Each body dissolved with hyperphosphorus quick-burning incendiaries that left no identifiable remains. As he moved through the construction site, placing high-charge, low-mass explosives at the structural weak points of the Gargant, the fuel line, the power couplings, the internal mechanisms that a Vindicare's technical training had taught him would produce the most spectacular and complete destruction if ignited simultaneously. He extricated himself from the camp, climbed to a position on a nearby cliff face with a commanding view of the entire assembly area, and waited. In the morning, when Urgak the Unstoppable came out to inspect his beloved war machine, Skuld put a single headshot through the war boss and then immediately opened fire on the Gargant, each shot precisely targeting the explosives he had placed during the infiltration. The chain reaction was visible from orbit. The Gargant was destroyed in a conflagration that killed somewhere between 800 and 900 greenskins who were in its immediate vicinity. The war boss was already dead before the first explosion. Skuld made his way back to his drop pod. He extracted himself from the system. The mission was later assessed as only 86% successful because the damage to the Gargant, while catastrophic, was not quite total enough to prevent the possibility of reconstruction. The Assassinorum's standards are, in case you had any doubt, extremely demanding. However, the combination of the war boss's death and the delay imposed by the destruction created enough time for the Imperial Navy to arrive and bombard the site from orbit, eliminating the threat entirely. Morias Skuld went on to become the Grand Master of the Vindicare Temple as the senior leadership of the entire clade, which tells you something about how the temple regards this mission. Equally interesting, and in a different vein, are the operations documented against religious and political threats, the missions where the Vindicare's role as an instrument of ideological control is most clearly visible. In the 501st year of the 37th millennium, Cardinal Jerome of Oristia IV, a figure who had accumulated extraordinary personal wealth through illegal levies on the planetary population, made the decision to formally secede from the imperial creed. He was building a private army of Frateres militia, and had apparently convinced himself that his resources and his popular following would protect him from the consequences. Yet he was shot in the roof of the mouth by a Vindicare assassin while he was singing subversive hymns to his congregation. The moment was carefully chosen, while he was preaching, surrounded by his most devoted followers, at the peak of his apparent power. The point was not simply to kill the cardinal. The point was to demonstrate, at the moment of maximum symbolic weight, that the apparent power was an illusion. The crowd watching saw their leader fall at the height of his performance, and the message delivered by that timing was arguably as important as the elimination itself. In the 3rd year of the 38th millennium, And a progressive astronomer named Linus Skard was declared heretical by imperial authority, their research into the nature of the galaxy having produced conclusions that the relevant ecclesiastical bodies found incompatible with established imperial doctrine. The Vindicare assassin, Erasmus Menst, was dispatched. The record is sparse, as it typically is, but Linus Skard is not noted in any subsequent imperial scientific record. The work was done. These missions represent the more uncomfortable edge of what the Vindicare does. The Cardinal is easy to justify, a corrupt leader building a personal army and destabilizing imperial rule. The astronomer is more difficult. Science has never been entirely safe in the Imperium, and the line between dangerous heresy and merely inconvenient discovery has never been reliably drawn. The Vindicare's training, and the motto that drives it, does not require the operative to engage with this discomfort. The outcome, the preservation of the Imperium's ideological coherence, justifies the deed. Full stop. This is not a comfortable conclusion. But the 41st Millennium is not a comfortable setting. And then there is the Lammas campaign, which is documented less as a named operative story and more as a category, a kind of archetype of what a single Vindicare can accomplish against an enemy force, far exceeding anything one person should reasonably expect to resist. During this engagement, an Eldari assault force, aggressive, highly mobile, deeply experienced warriors who outclass most Imperial soldiers in individual combat capability by a significant margin, advanced on a position defended by Imperial forces. But among those forces, undetected, was a single Vindicare assassin who had been positioned in a ruined tower. The Eldari advance slowed and stopped. Shot by shot, the assassin was removing the elements that drove the enemy's tactical cohesion. The Exarchs, the warrior mystics whose leadership and abilities were central to the Eldari assault strategy. The Warlocks, the psychically gifted who provided the assault force with battlefield awareness and protective wards. The support weapon crews, eliminating the long-range firepower that would allow the enemy to suppress the position from a distance. The shots came from different angles within the tower, suggesting either multiple shooters or, correctly, a single shooter who had prepared multiple firing positions within the structure and moved between them to prevent the trajectory analysis that would identify the shooter's exact location. Eventually, the Eldari sent scouts to clear the tower. When they arrived inside, the assassin was gone. In their place, the scouts found booby traps, grenades on triggers, placed to ensure that the discovery of the empty tower would still exact a cost. The Eldari advance, according to records, did not recover from the disruption of that morning. A single human being with a rifle had halted an alien assault force through patience, precision, and the cold calculation of which deaths would most thoroughly unravel the enemy's ability to act. The first mission that changed history, Deadliest, and the attempt to kill Horus. No discussion of the Vindicare Temple can reach its full depth without addressing the figure of Deadliest, a name that sits at the intersection of the temple's highest achievement and its most devastating failure, a story that reverberates through imperial history in ways that were never intended and never fully resolved. The setting is the Horus Heresy, the most catastrophic event in the Imperium's history, the war that came within days of destroying everything humanity had built during the Great Crusade. The War Master Horus, the Emperor's most beloved son, the most gifted military commander in human history, the being whose very name had become synonymous with victory, had turned against his father. The reasons for this betrayal have been debated in hushed imperial scholars' chambers for 10,000 years. The consequences were immediate, catastrophic, and permanent. The Officio Assassinorum, faced with a civil war that threatened to consume the galaxy, convened in secret. One individual, one bullet, could end this before it properly began. If Horus could be killed early, before the war fully mobilized, before the traitor legions had the momentum of victory and the psychological certainty of a cause, if a single perfect shot could find the War Master at an early, unguarded moment, then perhaps 10,000 years of subsequent darkness could be avoided. The decision was made to send the Imperium's first ever execution force. 6 operatives, one from each of the founding clades, assembled under a single mission command. And the mission commander, the person judged most capable of leading this collection of individually extraordinary killers toward a common objective, was Aristida Kell, Vindicare assassin, rank of Epsilon Dan, the highest attainable operational grade within his clade, a man who had earned that rank through a career that had, by all accounts, been faultless. Kell's personal history is unusually well documented for a Vindicare operative, partly because the events of the heresy created records that were distributed too widely to be fully suppressed. He grew up in the slums of a hive world called Thaxted Duchy, the last surviving member of an aristocratic family that had been systematically murdered by rival dynasties in the endless political violence of hive politics. Orphaned and alone, he and his sister Jenica had been taken into the Schola Progenium. Both became Assassinorum operatives. Jenica Soalm entered Clade Venenum. Aristida Kell entered Clade Vindicare. They did not know about each other's career paths. The Assassinorum keeps its operatives separated until they were both selected for the execution force. There is something deeply striking about this reunion. 2 siblings, both of whom had lost their family to violence, both of whom had been recruited into the most violent institution in the Imperium, meeting again at the moment of the organization's greatest and most desperate operation, separated by the years of conditioning that had stripped both of them of the emotional vocabulary to fully process what that reunion meant. Kell objected to his sister's inclusion in the force, as on professional grounds. A personal connection to another operative was precisely the kind of vulnerability that the Temple's conditioning was designed to prevent. He was overruled. The execution force traveled to the world of Dagonet, where intelligence placed the War Master in attendance at a political ceremony, appearing before the population of a newly fallen world to receive their formal declarations of loyalty to his cause. The situation was exactly what a Vindicare could exploit. Horus would be visible. He would be in a public space, performing a public act. There would be a window of opportunity. Aristida Kell found his position. He set up his firing solution. He watched through his spy mask as the War Master's arrival was announced, as the crowd assembled, as the ceremony began. And then the figure who stepped into his crosshairs was not Horus. It was Luke Sedarai, one of the War Master's most trusted captains, who had been sent to take the War Master's place at the ceremony, while Horus himself remained elsewhere. A body double, not in the deceptive sense of being disguised as Horus, but simply a substitute whose presence was sufficient to conduct the ceremony. Whether this was a deliberate security measure, foreknowledge of the assassination attempt, or simply the routine precaution of a military leader who did not expose himself unnecessarily, is a question that does not have a clear answer. Kell took the shot anyway. Sedarai died. The mission had failed at its primary objective. The response was swift and devastating. Horus ordered an orbital bombardment of Dagonet, punishing the planet for the attack. The execution force found themselves in a collapsing mission, with enemy forces actively hunting them, their position compromised, their primary objective unachieved, and the War Master they had traveled across the galaxy to kill nowhere near them. In the chaos that followed, one by one the members of the force were killed or lost. Most of them fell against a counter-operative deployed by the enemy, a creature of terrible power known as Spear, an anti-psyker entity whose capabilities were unlike anything the Assassinorum had encountered. Kell survived. He survived long enough to kill Spear. The counter-mission succeeded, even as the primary mission failed. The Black Pariah, the chaos-tainted anti-assassin sent to kill the Emperor, was destroyed. But Horus lived. Kell's fate after this point is recorded in sources that are themselves partially classified, their accuracy subject to some dispute. What is documented is that he did not give up. He commandeered a vessel and attempted a suicidal direct approach to the vengeful spirit. Horus's flagship. When that approach was met with overwhelming defensive fire, he transferred to a single escape pod and attempted to board the ship directly. That attempt ended in extraordinary circumstances, his pod landing in a section of the vengeful spirit that had been corrupted by the years of chaos influence and was now host to things that had no right to exist in a normal spatial environment. What happened to Aristide Kell aboard the vengeful spirit is a story that deserves its own dedicated exploration. The short version is that he was eventually found, and years later, his mind partially broken by the ordeal but still functional, and still, in some terrible sense, loyal to the purpose that had brought him there. Horus, recognizing in this broken Vindicare a tool that could be redirected, captured him rather than killed him, and attempted to corrupt him to chaos. Whether Kell's subsequent actions under chaos influence represent a genuine betrayal, or a mind that had been so comprehensively unmade by years of isolation and trauma that it could no longer maintain its original orientation, is a question that the records resist answering definitively. What Aristide Kell's story represents for the Vindicare Temple is something important and uncomfortable. He was the finest operative his clade had ever produced, selected as mission commander for the most critical assignment in Imperial history, measured against every standard the Temple applied, and found to be exemplary. He set up the perfect shot under extraordinary circumstances, and the situation denied him the correct target through no failure of his own preparation. And then, after everything, he found himself inside the most hostile possible environment and endured there for years through nothing but the quality of the conditioning that the Temple had built into him. The outcome did not justify the deed. The primary mission failed. The heresy consumed the galaxy for years and left wounds that have not healed in 10,000 years. But Aristide Kell stood on a tower on a doomed planet and took his shot at the moment available to him. And the fact that his target was not the right person was not something that any amount of training or preparation could have prevented. And this is perhaps the most honest thing the Vindicare story can tell us about the nature of this kind of work. The perfect instrument, perfectly deployed in an imperfect universe. The outcome does not always follow from the deed, no matter how justified the deed was. The Vindicare in the 41st Millennium, the galaxy on fire, and the scalpel's work. 10,000 years have passed since the Horus heresy. 10,000 years during which the Vindicare Temple has continued, without pause or deviation, to train new operatives and send them out into a galaxy that has only become more dangerous, more chaotic, and more in need of the scalpel's edge. The 41st Millennium is a period of extraordinary crisis. The Great Rift, a massive tear in the fabric of reality running across the galaxy from end to end, has split the Imperium in two, have cut off countless worlds from contact with terror, opened pathways for demonic incursion on a scale previously unimaginable, and given every enemy of humanity an opportunity to strike at the moment of maximum vulnerability. The Chaos Gods are ascendant. The Tyrannid hive fleets continue their relentless consumption. The Necron dynasties are waking from their ancient sleep. The Tau are expanding their empire. The Eldari are fighting their own long decline. And humanity, spread across 1,000,000 worlds and held together by institutions that were stressed beyond their design limits even before the rift, is struggling to maintain any coherent response. In this environment, the Vindicare's specific capabilities have become, if anything, more strategically valuable than they were in earlier eras. The scale of the threats facing the Imperium makes direct military responses increasingly difficult to execute across the distances involved. When a Chaos warband unites under a compelling sorcerer lord, whose tactical brilliance is amplifying their capacity to destroy, deploying a full Space Marine chapter to deal with that sorcerer lord may not be feasible before the damage becomes irreversible. A Vindicare operative traveling alone can reach that sorcerer lord before any significant force could be assembled. The Vindicare is used particularly heavily in situations involving demonic possession. This is one of the Temple's primary operational specializations in the modern era, identifying individuals who have been possessed by demonic entities or who have opened themselves to such possession through chaos-tainted practice, and eliminating them before the possessing entity can fully manifest in the material plane. A demon that has fully manifested is a problem requiring significant martial resources to address. A demon whose host body is killed cleanly before the manifestation completes is simply gone, forced back to the warp, without a foothold, without the opportunity to build the corrupting influence it would otherwise develop. A Vindicare bullet, precisely placed, delivered at exactly the right moment in the possession process, can prevent a demonic incursion that would otherwise cost thousands of lives and decades of subsequent purification. The false prophets and false messiahs are a perennial problem in the 41st millennium, and the Vindicare addresses them in exactly the same way they always have, with the dramatically timed single shot that removes the individual from the equation at the moment of their maximum apparent power. There is a particular cruelty to this timing that is entirely deliberate. A prophet killed in obscurity is a martyr whose story can be remembered and retold with the power of incomplete resolution. A prophet who simply falls in the middle of his most fervent sermon, surrounded by his most devoted followers, becomes instead a demonstration of inevitable imperial authority. The followers do not know where the shot came from. They know only that the voice they believed in was silenced in a moment, without ceremony, without the confrontation that would allow the movement to frame itself heroically. The movement tends to collapse, not into anger, but into confusion and loss of faith. There are, of course, missions that fail. The Vindicare is not infallible, and acknowledging the failures is part of understanding the complete picture of what this instrument can and cannot do. In approximately the 809th year of the 41st millennium, a Vindicare operative was dispatched to eliminate Cardinal Astral Zaphon on the world of Vrax Prime. The mission failed. The reasons for the failure are not fully documented in accessible records, but the consequences are well known to students of imperial history. The failure of the assassination precipitated a period of civil disorder that escalated through a complex chain of events into the siege of Vrax, one of the most devastating and prolonged siege engagements in recent imperial history. An operation that consumed resources on a scale that would have been incomprehensible if the planners had known what was coming. A single failed shot, a campaign that lasted years and consumed lives beyond easy counting. This is the risk calculation the Imperium accepts when it chooses the scalpel over the hammer. The scalpel's precision is its value, but the scalpel can also slip. The deployment process in the 41st millennium follows the same basic structure it always has, but the political complexity of authorization has, if anything, increased. The official requirement for High Lord's sanction remains in place, though the Grand Master of Assassins has considerable practical latitude in interpreting what constitutes adequate authorization. Since the return of Reboot Guilliman, return of him, the resurrected Primarch of the Ultramarines, who now serves as Lord Regent of the Imperium, another layer of command authority has been added. Guilliman's own sanction is, for major deployments, considered the appropriate approval. He has used the Assassinorum extensively in the Indomitus Crusade, his campaign to reconsolidate the Imperium's territory in the wake of the Great Rift. The practical effect of this political complexity is that the actual deployment of Vindicare operatives is often smoother than the official requirements would suggest. The Assassinorum has been navigating imperial bureaucracy for 10,000 years. They are very good at it. The comparative assessment of the Vindicare against the other temples is worth spending a moment on, first because it helps clarify the specific circumstances under which each approach is preferred. When the threat is a psyker, a Colexus is dispatched. Their pariah nature makes them specifically lethal to warp-touched individuals in a way that a Vindicare's physical weapons cannot replicate. When the threat requires the elimination of a larger group, a command structure, a heretical organization with distributed leadership, an Eversaw is often deployed, providing the terrorizing spectacle of wholesale destruction that the situation demands. When the mission requires embedding within the target's organization and working from the inside, the Kaleidos is irreplaceable. But when the mission requires a single, clean, incontestable elimination of one specific individual, delivered with precision from a distance, shown without triggering the kind of visible confrontation that would compromise the political messaging the kill is meant to deliver, that is the Vindicare. No other temple can match the Vindicare's combination of range, precision, and invisibility. The ability to remove a target from a crowd of innocent bystanders without touching any of those bystanders is an operational capability that no other assassination method can reliably provide. There are also strategic missions where Vindicare operatives are deployed not against a single named target, but against the command and control infrastructure of an enemy force. The ability to pick out the most critical node in an enemy's command structure, the individual whose removal will most comprehensively disrupt the force's ability to function, and eliminate that node with a single shot, it while remaining undetected and unavailable for counterfire, is a force multiplication capability that has decided engagements that no amount of conventional firepower could have resolved as efficiently. Against greenskin forces, in particular, the Vindicare's ability to eliminate war bosses, the individuals whose personal force of will is, literally, the mechanical binding agent holding greenskin forces in a coherent unit, has been used repeatedly and effectively. Greenskin culture's particular biology means that the force unravels almost immediately when the dominant personality is removed. One shot, one warboss dead, and a force that was threatening an entire system dissolves into scattered raiding parties within days. Against chaos forces, the Vindicare faces more complex challenges. The ruinous powers and the entities they empower are not always susceptible to physical death in the same way, and a chaos sorcerer lord who has made sufficient pacts may not die cleanly even when the body is destroyed. But for the human-scale commanders and cult leaders who enable chaos activity in a particular region, the Vindicare remains the most efficient tool available. The other snipers of the galaxy, and why the Vindicare stands apart. It is worth taking a moment to place the Vindicare within the broader context of precision long-range killing in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, because there are other practitioners of this art among the galaxy's various factions, and understanding the comparison illuminates what makes the Vindicare specifically remarkable. The Eldari path of the Outcast produces individuals, rangers, who are among the finest scouts and snipers in the galaxy. Eldari Pathfinders in particular represent the most extreme development of this path, individuals who have walked the Outcast path so long that they have begun to lose themselves to it, becoming something between a wanderer and a ghost, more comfortable in the wilderness between stars than among their own kind. Their rifles, long, elegant weapons that fire hypervelocity rounds optimized for the physiology of the Eldari body, are capable of extraordinary precision over extraordinary distances. The Vindicare Temple's own training literature, in what is either supreme confidence or accurate assessment, describes Vindicare operatives as eclipsing even the Eldari Pathfinders in marksmanship capability. This is a bold claim against one of the Elder race's finest warriors, but the operational record supports it. In multiple engagements, Vindicare operatives have operated effectively in environments where Eldari Ranger units were present and competing for similar tactical roles. And in documented confrontations, the Vindicare has generally performed at least equivalently and often superiorly in direct comparison. The Tau have their own precision marksmen, the Pathfinder and Stealth Suit cadres, whose combination of high-technology support equipment and disciplined fire produce effective long-range engagement capability. But Tau marksmanship philosophy is built around collective fire and technological augmentation in ways that make individual precision less central than it is in the Vindicare tradition. A Tau sniper is excellent. A Vindicare is something on a different level of personal capability. Space Marine scout snipers and the specialist operators of chapters like the Raven Guard or Alpha Legion represent the best that humanity's transhuman warriors can produce in the precision fire role. They are extraordinary. They are also not comparable to a Vindicare in this specific domain, because the Space Marine's augmentation is oriented toward everything, combat capability across every physical dimension, while the Vindicare's augmentation is specifically and exclusively oriented toward the single shot. A Space Marine Scout Sniper is a remarkable generalist warrior who is also very good at sniping. A Vindicare is a being for whom everything has been stripped away, except the ability to be the finest shooter in the galaxy. Imperial Guard Ratlings, the abhuman subspecies who are natural marksmen, physically slight and perceptive in ways their size seems to invite, are excellent snipers within the context of a conventional military unit. They lack the augmentation, the specialized equipment, and the depth of training that a Vindicare brings, but they operate in entirely different contexts and are not really a comparison for this discussion. What makes the Vindicare genuinely singular is not any single element of their capability. It is the totality, the range at which they can reliably engage targets, the breadth of ammunition types they carry, covering every possible category of protection or biological characteristic that a target might possess. The spy mask's data integration that turns atmospheric physics from an obstacle into a tool, and the conditioning that removes the psychological variables that cause even excellent shooters to miss under extreme circumstances. Nerves, hesitation, the weight of the decision, and the patience, the extraordinary, almost incomprehensible patience of an individual who has been trained and augmented to treat waiting as simply another form of work, and who will wait as long as necessary to deliver the outcome that justifies every deed. In a universe full of extraordinary warriors and terrifying weapons, the Vindicare stands out because they are the only one who will wait 6 years in a stone eye socket eating birds to take one shot. The quiet places where they wait. The life between missions. There is something that the dramatic missions and the famous kills tend to obscure, which is the texture of what a Vindicare's existence is actually like between the moments of action. And it is worth dwelling on this, because it says something important about what the temple's conditioning produces and what it costs. Between missions, Vindicare assassins return to the temple. The location of the temple is, of course, classified, somewhere on Terra, beyond the reach of unauthorized investigation. Within the temple, operatives exist in a state of controlled suspension, maintained in physical condition by disciplined regimes of exercise and technical practice, their skills kept sharp through training exercises that simulate the full range of operational demands. They do not socialize in the way that human beings normally do. The conditioning that reduced their vocabulary and stripped their emotional attachments is still fully active, and the daily life of the temple reflects it. Efficient, minimal, oriented entirely toward readiness. This is not, in any obvious sense, a pleasant existence. The older operatives, who can no longer sleep at all, exist in a continuous state of wakefulness that would destroy an unaugmented person within weeks. They endure it because the conditioning has also made them capable of enduring it. The biological need for rest that sleep fills has been partly met by other means, and the psychological need for rest has been reduced by a training process that did not leave much psychology to need anything. But the Nemesis novel, James Swallow's story of the first execution force and Aristide Kell, offers a rare glimpse into what remains beneath the conditioning, and it is both moving and disturbing. The Vindicare operatives depicted in that story are not robots. They are people who have had most of what makes them people deliberately taken away, and what remains has qualities that resonate. The pride of exceptional skill, the specific satisfaction of work done well, the complicated emotional reactions to encounters with the parts of life that the conditioning was designed to close off. Kell's response to his sister's presence in the execution force is not the blank indifference of a machine. It is something messier, a conflict between the conditioning that says personal connections are vulnerabilities and whatever biological bedrock of fraternal feeling still exists below the layers of deliberate erasure. This is, perhaps, the most honest and most uncomfortable element of the Vindicare's story. The temple does not produce machines. It produces human beings who have been shaped with extraordinary skill and deliberate intention into a very specific form. And the form requires the sacrifice of much of what we would normally consider constitutive of a good human life. The Vindicare is not miserable in the way that a person trapped against their will would be. The conditioning prevents that, but the conditioning cannot prevent the reader or the listener from noticing what has been given up to produce this extraordinarily capable instrument. The Imperium has decided that the outcome justifies the deed, and looking at the operational record, the war's not started, the heresies not allowed to spread, the world saved from the kind of destruction that follows when charismatic leaders with bad ideas accumulate enough followers to become uncontrollable. It is very difficult to argue that the outcome has not been achieved. But exitus acta probat is a philosophy that only works if you accept its premise. That the Imperium's survival is worth any cost. That the preservation of the structure that protects 10 trillion human lives justifies the sacrifices made, including the deliberate sacrifice of the full humanity of every Vindicare operative who walks through the training pipeline and emerges at the end as something refined, dangerous, and no longer quite what they were before they arrived. It is the Imperium's bargain with itself, and like all its bargains, it is made under circumstances where there may not have been a better option, and in terms that most of its citizens will never fully understand. The weapon that knows it is a weapon. Psychology, purpose, and the impossible burden. Before we get to the thematic reflection that rounds out this story, I want to spend some time on something that the operational records and the weapons catalogues tend to gloss over: the interior experience of a Vindicare assassin, to the degree that such a thing still exists. The conditioning process we have already described in detail, the vocabulary reduction, the severing of emotional attachments, the total reorientation of the self toward the mission, is intended to produce an operative who does not suffer in the way that a normal human being would suffer under the same conditions. An unaugmented person living alone for weeks in a cold stone hollow, eating raw birds, watching an empty sky for a target that might never come, would break down. The loneliness, the physical discomfort, the mounting psychological pressure of an uncertainty that extends with no end in sight. These things are designed to destroy human morale, and they do, reliably, in any person who has not been prepared for them. But the conditioning does not produce a machine. It produces a human being with a carefully curated interior life, rather than no interior life at all. And the question of what that interior life actually feels like from the inside is one that the lore approaches obliquely, through the handful of stories that allow us a brief glimpse. What seems to persist through the conditioning in the operatives who are most fully developed is something we might call professional presence, a quality of attention that is, in its own way, as rich and as textured as what most people would call emotional engagement. The Vindicare at Vigil is not blank. They are, in some deep and perhaps untranslatable sense, fully alive in the moment of their work. The kind of attention that a master craftsman brings to a complex piece, the sustained, intelligent, most appreciative focus on the problem that fills every available unit of cognition, is perhaps the closest analogue to what the Vindicare experiences during the long hours of the vigil. They are not waiting for something to happen. They are continuously engaged with everything that is happening, processing the data of the environment around them with the total investment of every capability the temple has spent years developing. The shot itself, when it finally comes, is not described in the records as an emotional experience, not triumph, not relief, certainly not pleasure. It is described, in the rare documents that capture anything of the operative's direct experience, as a completion. The state of attention that has been maintained for days or weeks or years reaches its natural terminus, or the preparation that has consumed the vigil resolves into the single action it was always building toward. There is, in this, something almost aesthetic, the satisfaction of a task completed at the level of precision that the task demands. which is perhaps the only form of satisfaction that the conditioning leaves fully accessible. What the conditioning cannot entirely eliminate, as the story of Aristotle demonstrates, is the capacity for something like moral response under sufficiently extreme circumstances. The temple attempts to replace moral response with the motto, the predetermined conclusion that the outcome justifies the deed, which is intended to resolve all moral questions before they arise in the field. This replacement works for the vast majority of operations, in the vast majority of operatives, throughout the vast majority of their careers. The Vindicare fires the shot that has been ordered. They do not second-guess it. They do not lie awake in something that functions like guilt. The system works exactly as designed, but under truly extreme conditions, when the mission presses against something that was not fully dismantled by the conditioning, when the operative is exposed to the kind of prolonged stress that even their modified biology was not designed to sustain indefinitely, the gap between what the conditioning achieves and what a full transformation would require becomes visible. Kell chose his sister, chose the counter-mission over the primary mission, in a moment where that choice might not have been what the Assassinorum would have selected if they were making the call from terror. That choice was, in the terms of the Temple's philosophy, a failure. In the terms of what it meant for a human being who had not been fully stripped of the capacity to care, it was perhaps the last authentically human act available to him. This tension is part of what makes the Vindicare narratively interesting rather than simply impressive. They are not entirely beyond human experience. They are human experience that has been compressed and redirected, concentrated into a narrow channel of purpose, but which carries within it the residual pressure of everything that was compressed away. The pressure finds expression at the margins, in the choice that deviates from protocol, in the hesitation that should not exist but occasionally does, as in the small acts of restraint that the mission technically did not require, but that the person performing the mission found, in some pre-verbal way, necessary. There is also the question of what it means to live as something whose primary function is the taking of human life, when the human equipment that would normally generate moral complexity around that function has been deliberately modified to not generate that complexity. The Vindicare does not feel the weight of the lives they have ended in the way that a normal person would. The conditioning prevents it, but the conditioning is not the same as not having taken those lives. The history exists, even if the emotional registration of that history has been rerouted. And in operatives who have served for decades, who carry in their operational record scores or hundreds of targets eliminated, each mission a year or more of their life, each shot a conclusion to weeks of invisible preparation. There is a question of what that accumulated record means to the person who carried it out. The law does not give us a definitive answer. The design of the Vindicare is explicitly intended to prevent the accumulation of moral weight from becoming a functional problem. Whether it succeeds completely is a question that the setting leaves productively open. What we can say is that older Vindicare assassins, operatives who have been in service for decades, who can no longer sleep, they who have been modified by their years of experience, and by the gradual long-term effects of their augmentation into something even further from ordinary humanity than they were when they first graduated from the training pipeline, carry themselves with a quality that the people around them sometimes describe as stillness. Not the stillness of a person waiting for something to happen, but the stillness of a person for whom the interior life has become so quietly self-sustaining that there is simply no need for the restlessness that marks human beings who are still seeking to become something. The old Vindicare has become what they were trained to be. They will die, eventually, on a mission, or in the rare circumstance that the body simply reaches the end of what even augmented human tissue can sustain. Until then, they continue. It is, in its own way, a kind of peace. Not the peace of contentment, but the peace of total clarity of purpose in a universe that denies that clarity to almost everyone else. The galaxy that fears the bullet, it cannot see. The Vindicare's reputation and strategic impact. The Vindicare's operational security is so complete that by design, most of the Imperium does not know the temple exists. Most Imperial citizens have never heard of the Officio Assassinorum at all, let alone the specific capabilities of its Vindicare clade. Even among those who know that Imperial assassins exist, the details of how they operate, what they carry, and what they are capable of are so thoroughly classified that any given informed individual is likely missing substantial parts of the picture. And yet the fear exists, not the specific, our articulated fear of someone who knows they are being targeted by a Vindicare operative, but the general, ambient, deeply embedded understanding that certain positions in the Imperium carry certain risks, that becoming the kind of person who attracts the Assassinorum's attention is a method of self-destruction that no amount of personal security can ultimately prevent, that there is no army large enough, no shield strong enough, no hiding place remote enough to guarantee absolute safety from an organization that will, if it decides to act, simply wait however long is necessary. This ambient knowledge, circulating through the upper levels of Imperial society in rumor, implication, and the occasional unexplained death of a prominent figure who was becoming inconvenient, is itself a form of strategic control. The Assassinorum does not need to deploy an operative to every would-be rebel or every ambitious planetary governor whose thoughts are beginning to trend toward defiance. The possibility that an operative might already be watching is often sufficient to encourage reconsideration. Among the Imperium's enemies, the reputation of the Vindicare has a different character. The alien races that have encountered Vindicare operatives in the field and survived to carry the intelligence back to their own leadership describe them in terms that reflect genuine tactical respect. The Aeldari, who do not easily admit to being outplayed by humans, have records of Vindicare operations in their engagement logs that are notable for the lack of the dismissive commentary that typically accompanies references to Imperial military capability. The Dark Eldar, who consider themselves the most sophisticated predators in the galaxy, lost Skyknife to a human who sat in a stone statue for 6 years. That fact is noted in their records without the usual sardonic framing. There is no funny way to present a 6-year vigil that ends with one of your best pilots dead before they knew they were being watched. Chaos warlords who have studied their operational history carefully, a small subset of a demographic that does not always prioritize careful study, know that the Assassinorum is responsible for several of the key eliminations that disrupted major chaos campaigns at their most critical moments. A Chaos Sorcerer Lord, who was 2 weeks away from completing a ritual that would have opened a stable demonic rift over an entire subsector, dead from a single round fired from an impossible distance. A Chaos Warband that had been grinding through Imperial defenses for 3 years, beginning to falter when their commander died in what initially appeared to be a targeted bolt strike from nowhere. The pattern is recognizable to anyone who knows what to look for. Greenskin warlords who survive long enough to accumulate the kind of battlefield intelligence that a successful warboss tends to accumulate have, in some cases, begun building behavioral countermeasures into their leadership practices, specifically to try to be unpredictable in their physical positioning and timing. This is, as cultural adaptations go, a remarkably sophisticated response from a species that is not typically noted for its investment in counter-sniper doctrine. It suggests that the Vindicare's operational impact on greenskin leadership structures has been significant enough to drive organizational learning at a biological and cultural level. None of these adaptations has made the target meaningfully safer. The Vindicare adapts too, and patience remains the deepest weapon in their arsenal. If the warboss changes his routine, the Vindicare learns the new routine. If the Chaos Sorcerer Lord builds better warding, the shield breaker round addresses the wards. If the planetary governor adds a 3rd ring of bodyguards, the operative finds the gap between the 2nd and 3rd ring. The fundamental problem with trying to protect yourself from a Vindicare is that time is on their side in a way that it is never fully on yours. The strategic calculus of what the Vindicare's work means for the Imperium is difficult to fully quantify, but impossible to dismiss. Wars that were not fought, heresies that did not spread, rebellions that collapsed on the death of a single leader before the first shot of a major engagement was fired, alien incursions that failed to materialize because the individual who would have coordinated them never had the opportunity. Each of these non-events represents resources saved, lives not spent, worlds preserved from the kind of devastation that the 41st millennium is very good at producing. The Vindicare is not the weapon that wins wars. The Vindicare is the weapon that prevents wars from being necessary, or at least determines that the war remains small enough to be won at a fraction of the cost it would have otherwise demanded. In an Imperium that is perpetually resource-constrained, perpetually overextended, perpetually fighting on a dozen fronts simultaneously, this represents an order of strategic value that is genuinely hard to overstate. One operative, one mission, one outcome that justifies everything that went into making that outcome possible. The darkness between the stars, implications, legacy, and the long shadow of the Emperor's knives. Let us take a step back from the specific details and consider what the Vindicare represents in the larger architecture of the Warhammer 40,000 universe's meaning. The setting of Warhammer 40,000 is, at its core, a meditation on what survives when a civilization is under perpetual existential pressure. What remains when you strip away everything that cannot survive the pressure? Or what does humanity become when it has been fighting for its life for 10,000 years against threats that would exterminate it without hesitation? The Space Marine is one answer, the pinnacle of martial aspiration, the post-human warrior who represents everything powerful and glorious about humanity's refusal to die. The Imperial Guard is another, the endless, grinding, ordinary courage of normal people who pick up their weapons and hold their positions and die in numbers beyond any meaningful count because there is nothing else to do. The Vindicare is a third answer, and in some ways, the most honest one. The Vindicare is what happens when the Imperium looks at the nature of the threats it faces, not the vast armies, but the specific individuals whose existence or whose ideas represent the kind of focused threat that armies cannot address, and decides to build a specific instrument for that specific problem. An instrument so focused, so deliberately constructed, so exactly matched to the purpose it serves, that building it requires sacrificing everything about its builders that does not contribute to that purpose. The Vindicare is what the Imperium does when it needs to be surgical in a universe that normally only permits hammers. And in the 41st millennium, that need is not diminishing. The Great Rift has made the galaxy more fractured, more dangerous, more full of the kind of individual threats that breed in chaos and feed on the loss of central authority. False prophets multiply in the darkness on the other side of a galaxy-spanning tear in reality. Chaos cults emerge and recruit in the trauma of worlds that have lost contact with the institutions that structured their lives. Alien leaders consolidate power in the vacuum that the Imperium's overextension has created. Every one of them is, potentially, a target. The Vindicare Temple is not resting. There is a particular piece of information that I want to close this chapter of discussion with, because it captures something essential about the Vindicare's place in the living politics of the 41st millennium. There is, in the current era, a Vindicare operative designated only as Vigilant Alpha who is documented to be actively shadowing Lord Inquisitor Kyria Draxus, an Inquisitor of considerable power and significance in the current story of the Imperium. This operative is not there to kill Draxus. They are, apparently, watching, monitoring, present in case the watching becomes something else. An Inquisitor of significant standing being followed by a Vindicare operative at someone's direction for reasons that are not publicly documented. This is the Assassinorum in its most politically acute form, not as an instrument of execution, but as a demonstration of reach. A reminder to one of the most powerful individuals in the Imperium that there is something older and quieter watching from above, and that the watching could, at any moment, become something more conclusive. This is what it means for the Vindicare to exist. Not just the shots they have taken, but the shots they have not yet taken, and the knowledge available to everyone who knows the temple exists. That the decision to fire or not to fire is being made somewhere by someone, at every moment, for every target they have ever assessed. The gun pointed at the galaxy's back, patient beyond any human patience, willing to wait as long as necessary, and never missing when the moment finally arrives. 1,000 ways to die. The Vindicare against the impossible. There is one more aspect of the Vindicare's story that deserves its own space, and that is the question of what happens when the perfect instrument meets the genuinely impossible target. The Vindicare is designed for the elimination of high-value human-scale targets. But the 41st Millennium is not a universe that confines its threats to human scale, and the history of the Assassinorum includes missions where even the finest operative in the Imperium's arsenal has been measured against something that exceeds any reasonable definition of what a single human, however augmented and however skilled, should be expected to address. The most famous documented example of this is the attempt to kill Horus, which we covered in the Execution Force section, and which failed. But it is worth revisiting that failure in the specific context of what it reveals about the limits of the Vindicare's capabilities. Horus was not merely a supremely skilled military commander, though he was certainly that. At the time of the heresy, he was a primarch, a being created by the Emperor of mankind himself, genetically elevated far beyond the transhuman baseline of a space marine, in direct communion with the powers of the warp, in a way that provided him with a level of tactical awareness and situational perception that no normal being could match. He had, in addition, spent years of the Great Crusade developing an intelligence network whose thoroughness should have made a covert assassination attempt nearly impossible to arrange without detection. And yet, the execution force came close. Kell set up the shot. The target present on Dagonet was not Horus, but the preparation was valid, the firing solution was sound, the operatives were in position. The mission failed, not because the Vindicare could not make the shot, but because the intelligence about target location was wrong. And this is a different kind of failure than the failure of capability. It is the failure of information, and it speaks to a challenge that the Vindicare faces that no amount of individual skill or augmentation can fully address. The quality of the mission is only as good as the quality of the intelligence that defines it. Against chaos, primarchs and demon princes in the 41st Millennium, the question of whether a Vindicare shot can achieve a meaningful result becomes deeply complicated. Physical death, for beings who exist partly in the warp, is not necessarily the same as permanent elimination. A chaos champion who has accumulated sufficient warp power may simply return after apparent death, regenerated in a new form, potentially taking years or decades, but eventually reconstituting. When the Exitus ammunition's extraordinary penetration qualities can certainly damage and destroy a physical form, but ending the ongoing existence of something that is as much a warp entity as a physical being requires a different approach. This is part of why the Vindicare is never deployed as the only tool in situations involving genuine demonic entities. The Culexus, whose pariah nature creates a direct interference with warp-based existence, is the specific counter to warp entities. The Vindicare and the Culexus represent different answers to different problems, and their pairing in execution force operations, where the Culexus addresses the warp-tainted aspects of a target, while the Vindicare addresses the physical, reflects the Assassinorum's sophisticated understanding of the range of threats they face. Against Xenos targets of sufficient capability, similar complications arise. An Aeldari Farseer operating at the height of their abilities may genuinely see the shot coming, not in a metaphorical sense, but literally, through their prescient abilities. The Shieldbreaker round addresses their rune armor's protective wards, but a Farseer who has foreseen the moment of the attack is a fundamentally different challenge than a target who is simply well protected. The documented assassination of the Farseer Lithandros Esmanthil in the 452nd year of the 34th Millennium was accomplished by a Calexis rather than a Vindicare, specifically because the Calexis's warp-nullifying presence prevented the prescient warning from reaching the Farseer before the operative was in position. Necron nobility represent another category of problem, beings whose physical forms are essentially just hardware for a consciousness that persists regardless of what happens to the body, and whose regenerative technology can, under the right circumstances, rebuild a destroyed form from nothing. The Vindicare can certainly destroy a Necron physical form with appropriate ammunition selection. The Turbo Penetrator round does not discriminate between organic and inorganic matter in its disruption effects, but the consciousness that animated that form withdraws to whatever archiving systems the Necron dynasty maintains, and the elimination of a Necron noble target often requires follow-up actions that ensure the body cannot be recovered or the consciousness cannot be reinstantiated. Yet these limitations are not failures of the Vindicare's concept. They are honest reflections of the scope of what one human being, however extraordinary, can achieve in a universe that contains things that were ancient before humanity existed. The Vindicare is the finest expression of what human precision and patience and courage can accomplish. The fact that some targets require more than the finest expression of those qualities is not a diminishment of the Temple's achievement. It is the universe being accurately represented. What matters is that the Vindicare exists. That against the vast range of threats that are within the scope of what one perfect shot can address, the false prophets, the corrupt governors, the alien warlords, whose removal decapitates a military campaign, the chaos champions, whose elimination disrupts a ritual, the human-scale commanders, who are doing extraordinary damage behind enemy lines, the Vindicare performs at a level that no other asset in the Imperium's arsenal can match for those specific situations. That is enough. In the 41st Millennium, being exactly what you are supposed to be, at the highest possible level of your specific function, is as much as anyone can ask. The last shot. What the Vindicare tells us about the Imperium and its sacrifices. We are coming to the end of our time with the Vindicare, and I want to use this final stretch to reflect on what their story actually means, not just in the narrow lore sense, but in the thematic sense that makes Warhammer 40,000 more than just a setting for plastic soldiers. The motto of the Vindicare Temple is Exitus Acta Probat. The outcome justifies the deed. It is one of the oldest and most contested maxims in the history of moral philosophy. The idea that an action can be retroactively justified by its result, that the goodness of the outcome cancels out the moral weight of the means used to achieve it, has been argued over by thinkers on old Earth for millennia before the first spaceship ever left that planet's atmosphere. In the context of 40K, it has been adopted as the founding principle of an organization whose entire existence is the application of that philosophy to the problem of targeted killing. What makes it interesting, and what makes the Vindicare more interesting than a simple story about good snipers, is that the lore is honest about the cost. It does not present the Vindicare as pure heroes. It presents them as instruments, precisely crafted and correctly deployed within the logic of their universe, but instruments built from materials that were once people. The conditioning process that produces a Vindicare is, at its most honest, a process of deliberate dismantlement, the removal of social humanity in service of a specific operational capability. The Temple considers this justified. The motto says so. The outcome requires it. And the outcomes the Temple has achieved, the wars prevented, the crises decapitated before they could grow to scale, support the argument. But the law also allows us to see, in figures like Aristide Kell, what lies beneath the conditioning when circumstances are extreme enough to test it. Kell chose, in the worst possible moment, to honor a human connection, his sister's final request, over the strategic mission objective. He pursued Spear when strategic calculation demanded he continue pursuing Horus. Whether that choice was a failure of conditioning or a residual expression of the humanity the Temple could not fully erase is a question the lore leaves open. What it tells us is that the transformation the temple attempts is not complete. Something persists. And that something, in a universe as demanding as the 41st millennium, is sometimes the thing that makes the difference. The Vindicare is also, in the context of the wider setting, a meditation on secrecy and institutional power. The Assassinorum knows things about what the High Lords of Terror actually value, as opposed to what they publicly claim to value, that no other institution is positioned to know. They have taken kills that were motivated by political convenience, rather than genuine existential threat. They have eliminated people whose only crime was inconvenience. The motto does not make distinctions between these cases, and the operatives are not trained to make distinctions either. This is the price of removing the human judgment from the individual and centralizing it at the institutional level. The institution's judgment becomes the only judgment that matters, and the institution is not infallible. Grand Master Drakan Vangarich, who eventually snapped under the weight of what his position required of him and massacred the High Lords of Terror, is a cautionary tale embedded in this same machinery. Yes, the person most responsible for overseeing the Assassinorum, the individual who has seen most clearly all the things the institution has done and why, eventually concluded that the people ordering the deeds were not worth the deeds, and responded in the only language the Assassinorum speaks. The Vindicare, in the end, is the Imperium looking at itself clearly, at what it does and why, at the costs it accepts and the benefits it believes it receives, at the gap between the stated values and the operational reality. Exitus acta probat is not just a motto. It is a statement of moral position that the Imperium has made and continues to make every time an operative receives a kill order and begins their vigil. Every time a heretic dies in mid-sermon without knowing the shot was coming, and every time a world is preserved from the war that would have consumed it if the man or woman who wanted to start it had lived long enough to do so. One bullet, one moment, the outcome, and the deed that achieved it. In the grim darkness of the far future, this is not the worst bargain that has ever been made, but it is worth knowing what it costs. It is worth knowing that the clean, invisible death delivered from an impossible distance was made possible by the deliberate unmadeness of the person who delivered it. The Vindicare is not just a sniper. The Vindicare is the Imperium's willingness to do whatever is necessary, carried in a human body, pointed at whatever the High Lords decide needs pointing at. That is who they are. That is what they are for. And in the universe of Warhammer 40,000, that is enough. Chuck, closing thoughts. Why the Vindicare endures in the imagination. Before we close, I want to say something about why I find the Vindicare such a compelling element of the lore, and why I think they tend to resonate with people who engage deeply with the setting. In a universe full of spectacle, space marines charging into battle with chainsaw swords, demonic legions tearing through reality, titan war machines that make the ground shake for kilometers around them, the Vindicare represents something almost quiet. The story of the Vindicare is a story about one person, alone, doing something impossibly precise in the silence before anyone knows it has happened. That quietness is its own kind of power, and it contrasts with the relentless loudness of most of the setting in a way that makes it stick in the memory. There is also the philosophical density of their concept. Every element of the Vindicare, the motto, the training process, the specific selection of capabilities and sacrifices, the documented missions, raises questions that the lore does not fully answer. Should the outcome justify the deed? What is lost when the humanity of a person is sacrificed for a function? Can an institution be trusted with the power that the Assassinorum wields? What does it mean to be the instrument of a judgment you did not make, against a target you may have no reason to consider worthy of death, on behalf of a power structure that is not infallible? These are not questions that have clean answers. The Warhammer 40,000 universe does not deal in clean answers, but it deals in these questions with extraordinary consistency. And the Vindicare Temple is one of the places in the lore where they are most sharply posed. And then there are the stories themselves. 6 years in a stone eye socket, eating birds, waiting for 1/2-second window to fire one shot, infiltrating an orc war camp alone, killing sentries with chemical dissolvers, planting explosives by hand, and then walking out through thousands of hostile combatants to take the shot from a cliff top. An entire Eldari assault halted by a single operative in a ruined tower, who was gone by the time the scouts arrived. A heretical cardinal shot in the mouth mid-sermon before the words were fully spoken. These are stories that the setting tells about the consequences of patience and precision, and total dedication to a single purpose. They are, in their own way, genuinely beautiful stories. Not because the kills are beautiful, they are cold, functional, deliberately stripped of ceremony, but because the patience and the craft and the absolute stillness of will they represent are beautiful, in the way that extraordinary human capability is always beautiful, regardless of the purpose it serves. The Vindicare will be there when you close this video, out there in the dark somewhere, waiting for the shot that justifies everything. Patient as stone, invisible as shadow, ready for the moment that ends a war before it starts, or prevents a prophet from finishing a sermon that would have burned a world. One bullet, one deed, one outcome, forever justified. Exitus acta probat. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today, diving deep into the Vindicare Temple and the extraordinary, haunting world that produced them. Yes, if you found this journey through the lore as fascinating as I did while putting it together, the best thing you can do is drop a like on the video. It helps the algorithm understand that people want more content like this, and it genuinely means everything to a channel like this one. If you are not yet subscribed to Q on 40K, please consider doing so right now. New lore breakdowns go up regularly, and we go deep on every topic we touch. There is a notification bell if you want to be among the first to know when new content drops. And leave a comment below. I want to know which part of the Vindicare story hit you hardest. Was it the 6-year vigil, the philosophical weight of the motto, the story of Aristide Kell, and what it says about what survives conditioning when circumstances are extreme enough? Tell me what you think. Guys, until the next one, stay in the shadows, stay patient, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, sometimes the most powerful thing in the galaxy is the person nobody knows is there.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.